I be like, sheesh, sunset on the beach. Make me wanna pull up on Miami with the heat. I don't know about you.
All right, what is going on, guys? Welcome back to the Anytime Sports Podcast Show. We are with Riley this week. Colin was unable to make it. But we're going to get right into it. We got a lot of interesting information this week. Coaches. A lot of teams need coaches. That's the big story now. NFL playoffs are starting to ramp up. And a lot of big news is happening. Let's jump right into this past weekend of NFL scores. We'll recap some of these games and see where some of these teams possibly could turn out. So we had wild card weekend this past weekend. Very eventful. We started off on Saturday, the 11th, with Texans and Chargers. Texans putting up a great performance. Chargers really showing the youth on their team. They're a very young team with a very new coach. But that showed. But they went a lot farther than people thought they would this year. And Riley, any thoughts on this game?
This wasn't a close game. It was interesting in the first half, but once after that, the Texans, they got in a groove. Their offense went off. Yeah, and the Chargers couldn't answer back.
Yeah, and both these teams are going to have great futures. Texans are probably going to get clapped this weekend by the Chiefs, if we had to guess. And the Chargers, they finished the season 11-6. That's way better than anyone thought. They were 6-3 away. Justin Herbert was 14 for 32, 242 and a touchdown, but 4 interceptions in this one. That's not what you want, especially in a playoff game. Texans, C.J. Stroud was 22 for 33, 282 and a touchdown and an interception. They're going to need to build on this team more. They picked up, they lost Stephon Diggs early in the season. Joe Mixon's getting older. C.J. Stroud's really young. You got some old guys on this team. You got some young guys on this team. If they're going to want to be good for a while, I think they're going to have to get some good draft picks and potentially build up that line a lot better because we know the Texans' line has sucked this year.
I would say also drafting another weapon for C.J. Stroud because you see Nico Collins was the only one that had above 40 yards of receiving. That can't continue. If they want to take the next level up, they would have to draft more playmakers.
Yeah, I agree there. And same thing with the Chargers. I saw a lot of things in the offseason, them getting T. Higgins from the Bengals because his contract's up. He's due for a big payment. He's played a big role, especially as a wide receiver too, over there in Cincinnati. So that is all up in the air there, and I think that could be a good landing spot for him. We'll have to see where the Chargers go because Ladd McConkey is going to be a great receiver for years to come. Other than that, they really have no weapons. No receiver got more than 2 receptions other than Ladd McConkey in this game. And yeah, this is definitely an interesting way to kick off the playoffs. But then another headline and another team that's been very iffy these last couple of years, especially with their current head coach, the Steelers and Ravens. Mike Tomlin, a lot of questions are aroused about his job. Is he going to stick around? What's going on here? Because he has, I think, 6 playoffs in a row that he's lost. He has some crazy streak of being above 500, which is a good problem to have. But if you're asking me, Steelers fans are overreacting. He brought you to the playoffs. That's all you need. I mean, you want to get a Super Bowl. But at the end of the day, you're going to bring a new coach in there. Who knows? He might even not make the playoffs. What do you think on this Tomlin situation?
It's an interesting situation because he knows how to get the best out of what he has. Mm-hmm. Especially on defense, or always have a top 10 defense. It's just that the offense can be concerning because they haven't really got a proven quarterback since Big Ben.
Yeah.
They tried it with Kenny Pickett. That hasn't worked out. And now they tried Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. And while they had some decent moments, they haven't been that game changer for him. So it'll be interesting how they attack the offseason.
Yeah, and considering both Fields and Wilson are due for contract extensions, they both run 1-year deals, they'll get to pick who they want. If I had to guess, I would say it's going to be Russ. Russ had more playing time. If they wanted Fields and they thought Fields was a guy, they would have kept playing him during the year. They took him out and they lost a lot, and they were good when he was in. But Fields will, if I had to guess, because there's a lot of quarterbacks in the league that are good now, and a couple quarterbacks are coming into the league that can be week 1 starters. If I had to guess, Justin Fields won't get a starting spot week 1 next year, but I think he could play a big role. I was talking to some people, and they said that what if we see Justin Fields on the Colts? Because Anthony Richardson and him kind of play the same way, dual threat. That could be a good landing spot for Fields. They both are around the same, drafted around the same time. Fields has a little more experience, but maybe you can use them in that 2 quarterback set. We were seeing that with the Commanders this past week with Mariota and Jaden Daniels. So if Justin Fields go to the Colts, that'd be interesting. But I'll ask you, where do you think Fields will go? Or do you think he'll pick up a bigger role, or is there a reason why?
I just think he's not the greatest of reading defenses in the field, so I think his best role going forward would be a backup on a contender, Mitch Trubisky. He's been a backup for the Bills for some time now, and I think that's what he should do right now. Be around good coaching, and maybe if he has a good year, like for Sam Darnold, he was with the Vikings. He was supposed to be a bridge quarterback for J.J. McCarthy, but then J.J.'s out for the year and he balls out.
Yeah.
Maybe that could happen with Justin Fields if he's in the right situation.
Yeah, exactly. Not to get too far away from this game, Russell Wilson was 20 for 29, 270, and 2 touchdowns. Not a bad game whatsoever, but they really couldn't get the ground game going. Najee Harris, 6 carries, 17 yards. George Pickens, 5 receptions, 87 yards. Lamar Jackson didn't have the greatest game. He put up 81 yards on the ground, 16 for 21 in the air. 2 touchdowns, actually not too bad of a game. He threw no interceptions. Derrick Henry absolutely lit up the Steelers' defense, which possibly might happen this week for the Bills. The Bills can't stop the run that well. You have 2 great scrambling quarterbacks. This Bills-Ravens game is going to be very, very interesting this upcoming week, and I bet you everybody going into this game thought the Ravens were going to beat the Steelers. Steelers were struggling these past couple weeks, and if they would have kept the ball rolling, it would have been good. But look, continuing on about the team we're talking about that's going to play the Ravens this weekend, we have the Bills and Broncos. Broncos, another team not a lot of people expected to make the playoffs, and they did. They squeaked right in there. Bo Nix had a great rookie year. He'll probably be the rookie of the year. Out of everybody who was expected to be rookie of the year, probably wasn't Bo Nix at the beginning of the year that everybody thought. Jaden Daniels or Caleb Williams were probably at the top of that list. But Bo Nix was in a great situation. That's what happens when you have good coaching. You can win ball games. You can make it to the playoffs. Bo Nix was 13 for 22, 144 and a touchdown. No picks here. He was the leading rusher. They couldn't really get the rush game going. 4 carries, 43 yards. Cortland Sutton, 5 receptions, 75 yards. Broncos really struggled on the scoring side and getting the ball into the red zone. They scored 7 in the first and really nothing after that. As for the Bills, everything was cooking on their team. The defense was great. 3 quarters limiting them to no points. Josh Allen, 20 for 26, 272, 2 touchdowns. James Cook, 23, 120. Josh Allen, 46 yards on the ground. Curtis Samuel led in receiving. And Buffalo's making it work. They don't really have, say, Shaquille Samuel and Kincaid. They're all great receivers, but they're making it work without big names. Like the Chargers did without big names. Like the Broncos did, besides Cortland Sutton, without big names. The Ravens are making it work with big names. The Chiefs are making it work with big names. I consider D-Hop a big name. And now Rashee Rice and those guys. But I would say the Bills are making it work, and they can make it far in the playoffs. But this next week is going to be very interesting. And I'll ask you, Broncos obviously surprised a lot of people, but where do you think they lacked this season, and especially in this game?
I think their defense was really let down because going into this, they had one of the league's best defenses, and the way they performed in this game, it was really disappointing. I think also the offense stalled out. Like, they had that really good play at the start of the game, but then they couldn't do anything after.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate when we see teams like these underdog teams come and ball out, or unfortunately don't ball out. Another interesting game here, Eagles and Packers. I will say, as a Bears fan, Bears ended the Packers season. We gotta love it. We're both Bears fans here. Colin's a Bears fan. You gotta love it. The Packers always choke in the playoffs. Packers fans are like, oh, injuries this, injuries that, but injuries don't affect a team. We see the Lions. They're one of the most banged up teams in the league, and they're still the 1 seed. The Texans, they still make the playoffs, and they put up a fight, and they're in the next round. Packers could not compete with the Eagles. Saquon Barkley, 25 carries, 119 yards, no touchdowns, but he could have had one at the end, but he slid down out of respect and probably did not hurt himself. Jordan Love, 20 for 33, 212 yards, and 3 interceptions. Josh Jacobs 81 yards and a touchdown. I feel like he's a good fit for their system they picked up in the offseason. Eagles, obviously, Devontae Smith was the leading receiver, 55 yards. A.J. Brown only got one reception for 10 yards, but he was reading a book on the sidelines. He wasn't complaining in this one. But what do you think the Packers struggled at? Because they lost to the Vikings, they lost to the Bears, and they lost to the Eagles 3 weeks in a row. Caleb Williams is 1-0 at Lambeau. You really can't lose that Bears game, but they did. And then they killed their momentum going into the playoffs. What do you think, and why can't they get it done? Because they're well coached, but why do you think?
I think just momentum really killed them, especially with Christian Watson injury. And I know they have other receivers, but he was otherwise known as their best receiver. And when that happens, and then the way you lost to your big rival, I just think they were in a funk. And when you go against a good team in the Eagles, you can't be in a funk and expect to win.
Yeah, exactly. You said it right there. And the Eagles, I believe they're playing the
Rams.
The Rams, yes. That'll be a good game, too. Rams could put up a surprising fight there. The Rams have been on fire lately. Not in that way. But also, no. The the Commanders and Bucks, Jaden Daniels leading Commanders to a 23-20 victory. This is a huge one for the Commanders in Dan Quinn's first year, Jaden Daniels' first year, and stop. Prayers out to everyone in LA. We're not that messed up, but oh my gosh. Okay, well this is unfortunate for Baker because he was obviously defeated in this game. They let up 10 points in the fourth. There's not much Baker could have done. There was that fumble kind of the last play of the game. They fumbled it, and the Commanders got it back, scored 3, won the game. You don't want that to happen if you're the Bucks. Baker put together a great year. Last year they made it to the championship. No, before the championship they lost to the Lions into the divisional round. And this game was good. This was the only good game in the wild card round of the playoffs. All these other games were blowouts and boring by the third quarter. But this was a good game, though. This is what we want to see. Jaden Daniels was 24 for 35, 268 and 2 touchdowns. He also had he actually didn't record any rushing stats on the ground. Mariota had 1 carry for 2 yards. And this is good for the Commanders. If you can win without your rushing quarterback rushing, that's good, especially against the Bucs team. Because like we saw early in Lamar's career, he was rushing a lot. He was banged up. And if you can keep Jaden Daniels from rushing and banging himself up, then you're good. As for the Bucs, Baker's 15 for 18, 185 and 2 touchdowns. Bucky Irving, 77 yards. And Mike Evans, 92 yards and a touchdown. What do you think was the reason the Bucs couldn't win this game? Obviously, they only scored 3 in the fourth quarter, but what do you think?
I just think it was late game management. Like, they played really well, but they just couldn't get the job done.
Yeah, and how far do you think the Commanders can go in the playoffs?
I don't know. It'll be really interesting because the Lions are a juggernaut, and I think if the Commanders want to win, they'll have to improve their rushing because they're not going to win with only getting 82 yards rushing on 33 carries. They'll have to make an adjustment and try to... If they can't get the rush, then hopefully Jaden Daniels... Do you think he'll be ready as a rookie from that environment?
Yeah, I'm not too sure. I didn't even know. I skipped past Jaden Daniels' rushing stats earlier. He had 13 carries, 36 yards. So he didn't even rush that much, but it's still 13 carries. Oh, yeah, like you were saying, they need to get the rushing going. Like I guess get Austin Eckler's older, but he needs at least 50 yards. You need to spread the ball around more on the ground. But Jaden Daniels moving on. This Lions, if they beat the Lions, I don't think they're beating the Eagles because the Eagles will probably beat the Rams. I don't think they'll beat the Eagles if they beat the Lions. Personally, as a Bears fan, after the Hail Mary game, I'm rooting for them to lose. But it'll be interesting because they have a lot of weaknesses, but they're stringing together wins, and they're close wins. But I don't know if the Lions will be that close, especially on the road in Detroit. That'll be a brutal environment to play in. But another game on top, Vikings. Rams absolutely dominating the Vikings 27-9. This game was in Arizona due to the wildfires. And the Rams came out on top. Matthew Stafford, 19 for 27, 209 and 2 touchdowns. The Rams are absolutely scary in the playoffs. Kyron Williams, 16 carries, 76 yards. Tyler Higbee was the leading receiver, 5 receptions, 58 yards. They could not get Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua going. Nacua had 44 yards, Kupp at 29 on 1 reception. It's interesting how the Rams are playing because the year they won the Super Bowl, it was Cooper Kupp. He was the reason they were there. He just kept getting open. Now, obviously, this game especially, he didn't get open. Sam Darnold, though, he had a terrible game and probably just cost himself $100 million. He was 25 for 40, 245, a touchdown and an interception. Some of his incompletions were terrible.
And sacked 9 times.
They were terrible. Aaron Jones, 13 carries, 48 yards. T.J. Hawkinson was the leading receiver, 5 receptions, 64 yards. You got to get the ball to Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson more if you're going to want to win. Combined, they had just 70 yards, and still they had no touchdowns. You're going to want a touchdown to them just in order to win because it's that simple because they're great receivers, and Sam Darnold probably isn't going to come back to Minnesota or get a starting job. These last 2 weeks, it stinks for him because he played so good during the season, but once it got to the most crucial part of the season, he played terrible. They lost the last week, lost the number 1 seed potentially, and then they lost in the first round of the playoffs to a 10-7 Rams team, or 9-7 Rams team at that point. But it's very tough for the Vikings and very tough for Sam Darnold. Obviously, they surprised a lot of people this year because you have Sam Darnold coming in for J.J. McCarthy. But I'll ask you, what does this mean for Sam Darnold? Do you think he'll get a starting job, or do you think he'll be a good guy to coach up a rookie? Or
I think he'll still get a starting job because his body of work is big enough for a team to take a chance because the QB market this year isn't the most robust. So teams are going to be desperate and try anything they can do. And I think a team will sign Sam Darnold to maybe like a 1 or 2 year deal to see if he can prove to be a franchise quarterback.
Maybe like the Browns or potentially the Raiders, or
I'd say maybe the Steelers could be a dark horse.
Yeah. But a lot of these teams that are like in the quarterback jumble there, but probably not coming back to Minnesota. If I had to guess, Minnesota will sign Daniel Jones over Darnold because you can pay Jones less as a backup because he hasn't had these past great couple of years to get away paying him a little less. It's a solid backup for J.J. McCarthy. Potentially Daniel Jones will start the first couple of weeks while McCarthy gets back into it. But this Vikings team, if they can keep it rolling like this with a young quarterback too, they'll be looking good because the oldest person on this team right now is probably Aaron Jones or T.J. Hawkinson. They're a really young team. So we'll have to see how far they can make it. Obviously, they're out for the season. And this NFC North will be interesting next year, too, with the Vikings' new quarterback, Bears' new coach, Packers, how their season ended, the Lions. We'll see how their season goes, if they make the Super Bowl or not. It'll be very interesting. But speaking of some interesting topics, let's get into some head coaching news. This has been the big storyline around this entire league this past couple of weeks. A lot of teams need a coach. A lot of coaches out there, but only one coach has been hired, and that coach is Mike Vrabel to the Patriots. That was probably the best fit for Vrabel and the best fit for the Patriots. The Pats did win their final game of the season over the Bills, costing them the number 1 overall pick in the process. So, at what cost? And after the 2 hours after that, Gerard Mayo got fired. And then the Patriots picked Mike Vrabel over Ben Johnson, who they interviewed, Byron Leftwich, Pep Hamilton, and they did not complete an interview with Aaron Glenn. So we're going to go over all these teams, go in depth, and we're going to see how good of a fit would each coach be? What coach is the best fit for these teams? Because there's a lot of teams out there. But first, I'll ask you, do you think Vrabel is the best fit for the Patriots, or do you think they have a long way to go before being good?
I think they'll be the best fit right now because the last couple of years, the Patriots have been one of the worst teams, and they want to go to a higher standard. So I think he'll coach the best out of them, but I don't know how high he'll bring their ceiling because he coached up some Titans teams, but they didn't go to a Super Bowl. And so it'll be interesting to see if Mike Vrabel can bring the Patriots back to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, because he did bring the Titans to a number 1 seed at the end of the day. But, like you said, no Super Bowl. They lost to the Bengals in the second round of the playoffs, and was it 21 or something? But he has such close ties with the Patriots, played so many years with the Patriots. He ended Tom Brady's career when he was the head coach of the or Tom Brady's Patriots career when he was the head coach of the Titans. And having those close ties to the Patriots, obviously a coach could feel more connected with that, and I think he's the best guy because he's not a bad coach whatsoever. He didn't get the best role last year because he didn't get like a head coaching job right away, but things come with time. And another team near and dear to our heart, the Bears. They fired Eberflus after Thanksgiving Day. Clock management. Thomas Brown didn't win a single game besides the last one of the season when Packers were resting their starters and then whatever excuses. But yeah, as Bears fans, this is a very stressful time. Probably a stressful time for Ryan Poles because his job's on the line. The Bears don't go 500 next year. Ryan Poles is gone. I'd say. Head coach will probably stay a couple years, whoever they hire. Thomas Brown is probably not a candidate for head coach. He'll probably be a great offensive coordinator on a team in the league. He's probably top on the list for offensive coordinators because he was a great offensive coordinator when he was on the Bears, but not as a head coach. He'll be a great head coach in a couple of years, but he's got a couple of years to go, and we see that a lot. So the Bears completed an interview. We're gonna go down this list. There's a big list. Anthony Weaver, Dolphins defensive coordinator. Drew Petzing, Cardinals offensive coordinator. Mike Vrabel, not him anymore because he was hired. Mike Kafka, Giants offensive coordinator, not why. Pete Carroll, former Seahawks head coach. Ben Johnson, Lions offensive coordinator. Aaron Glenn, Lions defensive coordinator. Ron Rivera, former Panthers and Commanders head coach. Thomas Brown, Bears interim head coach. Mike McCarthy, former Cowboys head coach. Arthur Smith, Steelers offensive coordinator. And David Shaw, former Stanford head coach and current Broncos senior personnel executive. And they're interviewing at the moment, or in the next couple weeks, Brian Flores, Vikings defensive coordinator. He was also the Dolphins head coach a couple years ago before McDaniels took over. Todd Monken, Ravens offensive coordinator. Joe Brady, Bills offensive coordinator. Matt Campbell, Iowa State head coach. Cliff Kingsbury, Commanders offensive coordinator. And Adam Stinovich, Packers offensive coordinator. And I'll ask you first, if you had a top 3, one being the most your favorite head coach for the Bears, what would it be? And then go from there.
I would say number 1 would be Ben Johnson, just the way he's helped the Detroit Lions be a legit contender from nothing, and the way he play calls and got the best out of his offensive players. Like, he got Jared Goff to be a potential MVP candidate this year. And then my number 2 would probably be Monken from the Ravens. He has a good history. He was offensive coordinator for Georgia when they won 2 national championships. And then he went over to the Ravens, and he's got the best out of Lamar. He has Lamar. He helped him win an MVP trophy last year, and he has Lamar playing like MVP candidate this year. And then my number 3, they probably won't hire him, but Aaron Glenn, the Lions defensive coordinator, they will probably hire an offensive guy for Caleb. But I think Aaron Glenn, this may sound like, cheesy, but he's a good leader of men and like culture guy.
Yeah.
And I think he'll get the best out of his players, similar to like Mike Vrabel. But I don't think they're going to hire him because they're going to hire an offensive guy.
Yeah, and Aaron Glenn has been on the Lions staff for a while now, since 2021. I believe.
Down, but now I'm
I
was down, but now I'm yeah. This all God, this ain't no love. Yeah, I used to be stuck in that love. Yeah, I was down, but now I'm
offensive coordinator, being Matt Nagy. You had a defensive coordinator, Matt Eberflus. So you've tried all 3, and I think what they don't have, and what they haven't had since Lovie Smith, is an experienced, established head coach with a good resume. And I think that's what Mike McCarthy would bring. We were talking the other day that we could talk ourselves into Mike McCarthy. Doesn't have a bad resume, but it's his bad resume parts that really shoot him down for that job. Because this past year for the Cowboys, they were terrible. They also had injuries, but they were terrible. Tom 2020 with the Packers. I believe it was 2020. They were terrible. And that's when he left there. But the good years, he brought the Packers to a Super Bowl victory. He brought the Cowboys to multiple number 1 seeds. He's had a good. His overall record at the Cowboys was really good before this year. So I'll basically answer my own question. If I had to pick top 3, one obviously Ben Johnson. People are going to be so mad if they hire anyone but Ben Johnson. But at the end of the day, it's if Johnson wants to go to the Bears. They're interviewing him. They're doing everything they can. People are going to be like, Bears are the worst franchise ever. No matter who they hire, it's going to be the wrong decision. And my 2 would probably be Mike McCarthy. I would like to see a guy bring culture to the Bears. Matt Eberflus had experience in the league. He probably brought some culture. He was a great guy, but when you don't know how to coach the team, they're not going to want to follow a guy that doesn't know how to use time management. Mike McCarthy obviously has no noticeable problems with time management. He built a culture in Dallas, built a culture in Green Bay. If he could build that culture in Chicago and coach them well, then yeah. He's still younger too. He's not like Pete Carroll age. He's got time in the league. He's got experience as a head coach, and he's been a head coach for a while. The only thing that worries me about Ben Johnson is his culture building. Mm-hmm. He's a great coach, but can he bring that culture? That's the thing. But he's still my number one. Ben Johnson's still my number 1. Mike McCarthy, my number 2. And I would probably, if Mike Vrabel was still in it, I'd say he'd be my number 3. But I think I'll go with you and say Munkin as my 3.
Oh, what do you think of the Bears interviewing so many coaches?
I like it. You need your options. That's the thing. Say they're just going to interview Pete Carroll, McCarthy, Ben Johnson, and Vrabel when he was still out there. Then you only have 4 options. I like getting the options, getting the things out there. But say they hire a guy like Arthur Smith. They hire a guy like Matt Campbell. Don't hire a college head coach yet. I don't think. They could be good. They could be good in a few years, but not yet. Don't hire those guys. You can interview them. Keep interviewing people. Like Ron Rivera, he has a great coaching resume in the league. Now, he probably won't get that job, but that's also a thing. Maybe sees a guy. Maybe he gets a couple tips from Ron Rivera, who's seen the league a little bit, and see what a guy like him has to offer, and then maybe say, hey, he offers this. Maybe a guy like McCarthy, who we're actually interested in, will have these same things or whatever. It's kind of getting your toes in different things. Like, I doubt they had any intention to hire Mike Cave because the Giants' offensive coordinator, but maybe they wanted to see what he brought to the table. And the Cardinals' offensive coordinator, Drew Petzing, or Anthony Weaver, the defense coordinator for the Dolphins. It doesn't seem like those be the popular options, but they're probably just exploring their options.
Yeah, because it's interesting for me because I think you should cast a wide net, but if you have a guy, you need to go all out for him. Because I remember when the Bears hired Mark Trestman, they had a chance to get Bruce Arians, but since they were dragging their feet, they missed out on him, and he's a really good coach. He won a Super Bowl. He has playoff success. Yeah. So if Ben Johnson, is their guy, they need to go all out for him.
Yeah. And what they haven't done and not be able to do because he's in the playoffs is do an in-person interview. Were one of the first teams to do a Zoom interview with him. The only coach they had an in-person interview with is Mike McCarthy, which isn't a bad thing, and he'd be a solid coach if they took him. But this will be an interesting story to follow. And it's been interesting that out of all these teams, only one coach has been hired so far. Because there's a lot of coaches. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of coaches that are still in, like Aaron Glenn, Ben Johnson, and then you got Joe Brady, Bills offensive coordinator, Todd Monken. They're still all in it. Brian Flores just got eliminated, so you haven't been able to interview some of these guys. But I bet you as the days go on, we'll see it. But Bears will definitely be one of those top spots to get, and I think Ben Johnson, that's probably the spot he wants to go. He said that in the past. That's the spot you want to go. It's in a big market. You've got a big team. They're waiting for you. You got young talent at quarterback. You got some good draft picks this year. You can really build a team there and fans that are really dedicated to their team. Probably most dedicated fan base in the entire league. And you have the chance to lead that.
I think it's better than a Raiders job. That's what he's most rumored to go to, because I think that division's harder because you have to go against Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, Bo Nix is developing, and the Raiders, they don't have like a clear plan for a quarterback because they don't have a high enough draft pick to select a quarterback. And then I don't think there's like any free agent or tradable QBs that are good enough that are better than Caleb, in my opinion.
Yeah, you're kind of screwed there, and also the NFC North is a little tricky, but at the same time, teams are so spotty, and if you just if you boost your team up so well, then you could easily push like the Vikings and Packers aside because they're beatable teams, and they almost beat them this year.
Especially after this offseason because, the Vikings, they're going to be without Sam Darnold, who played like an MVP candidate. The Packers, they only had one win in the NFC North, and that was because of a block kick.
Yeah.
And then the Lions, they're most likely going to lose both coordinators. Teams can fall off after losing so many good coaches.
Yeah, and then as for like the Raiders, the Chiefs aren't going anywhere. The Chargers aren't going anywhere but up. The Broncos aren't going anywhere but up. And I get Tom Brady as being part owner of the Raiders. He might be influencing this, which seems kind of bogus because he's a commentator and he's kind of influencing these things. But if I'm Ben Johnson, I'm taking the Bears job because nothing seems more appetizing than leading a franchise who's been struggling and hasn't had a Super Bowl appearance in over almost 20 years to the playoffs. But
especially with a quarterback that could be with Caleb Williams, who has the potential to be like a top 5, top 10 quarterback in the league.
Yeah. Let's move on from the Bears because we can talk about them all day. Let's talk about the Cowboys. This was an interesting thing too. We saw there's one big name tied to them right now. It was literally I'm reading this thing on the eve of a contract set to expire. The Cowboys and McCarthy decided to part ways. It was interesting because they couldn't agree on an agreement. And I'll ask you, what do you think this stemmed from? Was this Jerry Jones not wanting to pay McCarthy? Did he not think McCarthy was a guy? Because he wasn't terrible with the Cowboys. They had a bad roster this year because Dak was out. Do you think this was him not wanting McCarthy, or was there a guy in mind that he wants?
I know it is interesting because the Cowboys could have let him go by letting him interview the Bears, but they denied him.
Yeah.
And so I feel like they should have done that if they were looking for a new head coach because they lost out on potential options. They lost out on a Mike Vrabel. And so now what they disagreed upon, it's interesting. Maybe they just thought it was better for both sides if they both left.
Yeah. He went 49-34 during his 84 regular season games, which isn't bad whatsoever, and 3 straight 12-5 seasons. There is very interesting. He's not on this list here, but the top candidate so far who hasn't had a former interview is Deion Sanders. We'll get into that in a sec, but we'll talk about the 3 guys that they are interviewing, haven't completed interviews with because they just fresh off McCarthy. Kellen Moore, Philadelphia Eagles offensive coordinator, Robert Saleh, former New York Jets head coach, and Leslie Frazier, Seahawks assistant head coach. Are these 3 guys here? I like Saleh or Kellen Moore, obviously one of those 2. But the big guy that everyone's been talking about, Deion Sanders. Now, if Deion comes to the league, obviously he has ties to the Cowboys. Does he require them to take Shador in the draft with his contract? Does he require? I don't know. What do you think?
It's interesting. I think Kellen Moore is the best available option, but I think if they don't hire Deion, I think a dark horse could be Pete Carroll because he has success everywhere he goes. He may be a little older, but he knows how to get the best out of his offenses. And with Dak, who could be a really good quarterback with the right coaching, I think they might hire him because Pete Carroll, he's on his last stop, and he wants to end on a Super Bowl, and that could be with the Cowboys.
Yeah. He has great experience there, but it's another thing that if you hire Deion and he requires all these things, you have to trade away Dak, who you spent so many years developing, you signed such a big contract. Who knows if a team's going to want him? You're probably going to trade him at lower value than you would because he's coming off an injury. He's not coming off of a great year. If he came off a year where he led them to the playoffs, he'd be worth a lot, but he's worth less than he would be if he was good. And if Deion wants them to draft Shador, you're going to have to give up a lot of assets to trade up. Probably Dak and a good pick to trade up and get Shador. But I could see them going multiple ways. I think the Deion Sanders route is a stretch because he said he wants to stay in Colorado, and I don't blame him. Like we were saying, it's a good situation for him. His son isn't going to be there, and he's probably going to get drafted. If I had to guess, Shador would probably go to the Raiders. because Cam Ward will probably be first. We'll get into college football a little bit later. But yeah, it'd be an interesting situation. I like Kellen Moore going there too. Next, you got the Jacksonville Jaguars. They are also an interesting team. They have a few completed interviews. Steve Spagnuolo, Chiefs defensive coordinator. Ben Johnson, Aaron Glenn, Patrick Graham, Raiders defensive coordinator. Liam Cohen, Bucks offensive coordinator. Robert Saleh, former Jets head coach. They're going to be in the process of interviewing Eagles offensive coordinator. Kellen Moore, Todd Monken, Ravens offensive coordinator. Joe Brady, Bills offensive coordinator. And Brian Florence, Vikings defensive coordinator. The Jags are an interesting situation. They've always been in and out of head coaches. Urban Meyer, Doug Peterson. They were terrible this year. In the past, they did good. They were 9-8, win a playoff game. They were 8-3. They were in contention for the 1 seed in the AFC at 8-3. And they collapsed down the stretch last year. Doug Peterson has been a great head coach. Obviously not this year. Lost his job. He probably won't get a job anywhere immediately this offseason. But Jacksonville wasn't competitive at all, and they've been all over the place recently. And I'll ask you, who do you think is the best option for here?
It'll be interesting that they're interviewing Steve Spagnuolo because he doesn't get a lot of head coach interviews besides being like one of the best like defensive coordinators in the league. I don't think they'll hire him because I think he's happy playing with the Chiefs. But I think maybe a dark horse. I think they'll hire Aaron Glenn.
Yeah.
Probably because he's good at culture setting, and that's what the Jaguars need.
Yeah, I would agree with you on Aaron Glenn. I don't think they'll get Ben Johnson. He probably doesn't want them. They have a solid defense, so I think putting Aaron Glenn in there will be good. Let's move to the Raiders. We were talking about them a little bit earlier. They fired Antonio Pierce after his first year. But they're also interesting. They're also a top. They've completed interviews with Ben Johnson. Their top spot for him to land Vance Joseph, Broncos defensive coordinator Robert Saleh, former Jets head coach. Todd Monken is also going to be interviewing Aaron Glenn. Is going to be interviewing Steve Spagnuolo here too, and former Seahawks head coach Pete Carroll. Who do you think for this team for Raiders?
If it's not Ben Johnson, I think maybe Todd Monken. He has experience in the league and with good offenses, and I think Tom Brady will be happy with that.
Yeah, I agree there too. I think Todd Monken will probably get a job somewhere because there's a lot of teams. Todd Monken, Aaron Glenn, McCarthy, and Ben Johnson are probably 4 guaranteed coaches to get a job somewhere. I doubt Steve Spagnuolo is going to want to leave the Chiefs unless they give him like an arm and a leg. Probably won't. Pete Carroll probably get a job somewhere because he's in like every single team. I don't know. That'd be hard to say. But I think those guys will, and I could see. Let's move to the Saints. This is probably the worst situation for any coach to go. They have the worst cap space in the entire league. You have no quarterback. Derek Carr is good, but he's banged up, and he's always banged up. You have Chris Olave, one of the top receivers in the league, but he's always banged up. You have Alvin Kamara getting old. You have a defense with people that are getting old, like Cam Jordan. But this team isn't getting any younger. They have a bunch of old people. They don't have that great of a draft pick. And you're always you're in dead cap space, so you can't really hire anyone. And they've only completed interviews with Mike Kafka, Giants offensive coordinator, and Aaron Glenn, Lion defensive coordinator. And there's not many big names on their interviewing process. So they have Mike McCarthy, Cliff Kingsbury, Anthony Weaver, Darren Rizzi, Saints interim head coach. The interim head coaches usually don't get hired. David Shaw, former Stanford head coach, Kellen Moore, and Joe Brady. So not many big names on their to be interviewed list. Now, would you blame any coach for not taking that job? No. Aaron Glenn will probably go to the Jags. So the only guy they've interviewed that they could potentially give the job to today is Mike Kafka, the Giants offensive coordinator. This is probably the worst spot for anyone to land, and I'll ask you, who would you see landing here and why?
I would say maybe like a Mike McCarthy and Pete Carroll who desperately want to be a head coach, because I don't think if the Bears don't hire Mike McCarthy, I don't know who else will want to hire him, because I think for Mike McCarthy it's between the Bears and the Saints. And then for Pete Carroll going there, despite how old he is, I think he still wants to coach, and I think the Saints will take him because he's the most proven. And I don't think like other coordinators want to go to the Saints as their first job.
Yeah, and they haven't even requested an interview from Carroll yet, but we could see that in the coming weeks. Now the New York Jets head coach. This is also going to be a very interesting spot. They have a huge list of coaches here, because Aaron Rodgers, who knows if he's going to be there. Devontae Adams probably isn't going to be there. Could we see Devontae Adams go back to the Packers? I don't know. But yeah, the Jets did fire Saleh during the year, which is a bad decision, obviously. And they fired their GM, Joe Douglas, earlier this season. But they completed an interview with Mike Vrabel, the only team to complete an interview with Matt Nagy, Chiefs offensive coordinator, Bears legend. Ron Rivera, former Panthers and Commanders head coach. Rex Ryan, that one is very interesting. Former Jets and Bills head coach. Now he's on TV. Steve Spagnuolo, Mike Locksley, Maryland head coach. Locksley. They hired some people they interviewed some people, not many other people interviewed. Steve Spagnuolo, again, I don't think he'll get the job. Aaron Glenn, everyone's interviewing him. Darren Rizzi, Jeff Ulbrich, Jets interim head coach. Vance Joseph, Broncos defensive coordinator. Bobby Slowick, Texans offensive coordinator. And Arthur Smith, Steelers defensive coordinator. They are going to request an interview from Joe Brady, Brian Flores, get this, Josh McCown, Vikings quarterbacks coach, and also Browns legend. Brian Grice and 49ers quarterbacks coach. You don't really see quarterbacks coaches becoming head coaches, but that could also be another thing like the Bears are doing to get options, because where are they going to go with quarterback? Nobody knows, because Aaron Rodgers is there. Probably draft. I don't know, unless Rodgers has got another year. But who would you say is going to go here?
I would say this could be a Joe Brady spot.
Mm-hmm.
And then the reason I think they're interviewing those QB coaches is maybe they want them as an offensive coordinator.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that too. And we'll kind of go off track from quarterbacks real quick, but who do you think would be the quarterback here next year? Do they pick up a guy like Darnold again? Maybe bring him back to the Jets? I don't know.
I don't think Darnold will come back there, but this will be interesting because they have a pretty good draft pick, but they'll probably have to trade up if they want Shador or Cam Ward if the Titans don't pick him. But they'll probably have to go free agency. Could this be a Russell Wilson spot? Will Russ try to cook in New York? Let's see.
Yeah, cook some pizza up there. But, yeah, it's interesting there because Rodgers, he got, like, all emotional in the locker room after, and Rodgers never gets emotional. So maybe he's done. Maybe he's not. I don't know. This will be an interesting – maybe this is a spot for Fields. Get a starting job there. They're also up in the air. They're a spot that I wouldn't want it as a head coach. Them and the Saints, because you don't know what's going to happen with this team.
Mm-hmm.
Jets are always historically bad. Jets also Jets and Titans interviewed some GMs. We'll highlight the big one. Ian Cunningham from the Bears assistant head coach, interviewed for the Titans general manager spot. And now we were looking at it, and the Bears get 2 compensatory third-round picks if they get Ian Cunningham, which would be great for the Bears because you need depth. You need a lot of depth. And we could see that because Ian Cunningham is one of those top candidates for a head coach. He did not interview with the Jets. But let's continue, and let's go to some next week playoff games. I'd say we covered a good amount of coaches. There's a lot of coaches out there, and a lot of different things that can happen there. But we have the first Saturday game, Saturday at 3:30 on ESPN. We have the Texans and Chiefs. This game will be very interesting. Chiefs coming off of rest, but sometimes resting isn't the best thing. We see that sometimes in the league, and we also see that the Texans are coming off of a big win. But can they take down the Chiefs? We don't know. If you had to pick who's in this game and something big that'll happen, what would it be?
I think the Chiefs will win this game, but if the Texans' defense played like they did against the Chargers, then I think this game will be closer than everyone thinks. Because if it wasn't for the Rams' defensive performance, I think the Texans would have the best defense in the whole weekend.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the Texans will make this game a lot closer than people think, and the Chiefs the Chiefs are 8-0 at home. They're playing at home against the Texans. Their roommate forgot his keys. Oh my gosh! I'll just keep yapping while he's getting them. How do you forget your keys? But yeah, it's going to be a very interesting game. The Chiefs are 15-2 on the season. They're hard to slow down. They never really. They're hard to slow down. They never really can get taken down, especially at home. Tickets are as low as $93, surprisingly. But yeah, this is a 3:30 game. I don't think the Texans will have what it takes to beat the Chiefs. They are 11-7, 10-7. But yeah, it'll be interesting. They're coming off of a big win. But if there's a big story that'll happen in this game, I think the Chiefs will have a big injury, potentially. I don't know, as karma for all their black magic they had during the year.
Who's getting injured?
I don't know, maybe like Pacheco again or Rashee Rice for getting let off the hook so easily. But I think the Texans will keep this game closer than many people think. This will probably be the least interesting game out of all the games taking place over this weekend. It'll probably be the least interesting game, which is probably why it's at the 3:30 slot. But this next game will be more interesting. NFC matchup Saturday night, 7 o'clock. We have Commanders and Lions. Commanders 12-5. Lions are 15-2. Lions are also coming off a break. But yeah, I forgot to pick in the last game, but I'll probably pick the Chiefs. You probably pick the Chiefs if you had to bet on it. I want the Texans to win, but we probably will see the Chiefs win. We got the Commanders and Lions. This game will be interesting because the Lions are favored 73% in this, very, very heavily, heavier than I would have favored them. I would have favored it more like 60-40.
I agree.
But the Lions are on fire. David Montgomery's coming back to this. He's not going to be 100%. The Lions are playing great despite all the injuries they have. Tickets are as low as $351, which is insane. Detroit is 15-2. They are red hot, but they're also coming off of a week, so they'll be fully rested. But that rest is also sometimes a bad thing. The Commanders are rolling off of a big, close win, though. This game probably won't be as close as the Commanders-Bucks game. I think it's going to be a blowout. I think it'll be closer, maybe in the third quarter, second half, or the end of the first half. But the Lions will pull away from it in the fourth quarter. They always pull away these wins. And then I think we'll see the Lions move on. Who do you think will win this game, and what do you think will happen?
I think the Lions will win. And this is amazing how well they've done this season because they have tons of injuries. But with coaching from both Dan Campbell and both coordinators, they coached up the players that have gone after that have replaced those starters, and they've been adequate. As you see, they're the number 1 seed.
Yeah, and they were able to beat up on the Vikings the last time they played. And I don't think Jaden Daniels as a rookie, this is going to be such a hard atmosphere to play in. You played in all these atmospheres in the SEC.
Yeah.
Earlier in the year, during the season, you played in all these. But once it gets to playoff football, especially going to Detroit in Ford Field, that's going to be hard to play at, especially as a Commanders team that has a lot of spots and holes in it. That's going to be interesting. I'd take the Lions in this one, probably by 2 scores at the end of the day. It'd probably be close in the middle, but I think if I had to take a final score, I'd say by 2 scores.
Yeah, I agree.
And now this next game, these games progressively are getting more competitive. The Rams are on fire right now. They have won, let's see how many games in a row. They're playing for more than football. I mean, they beat, they're coming off of, they won 5 games in a row, lost to Seattle to close the season. Obviously, they rested their starters. So they won 5 in a row with their starters in. They won 8 of their last 10 with their starters in. And then you move on to the playoffs and you smoke the Vikings in the first round. The Rams are probably one of the hottest teams in the playoffs right now. Everything is cooking. What? What? Okay, the Rams are cooking, and I think the Eagles will struggle with them. Let's see the odds in this game. All Eagles are favored 65-34. That's about, I'd say, accurate. But momentum doesn't play into the odds, and I think that the Rams have that momentum. They're 10-7 in the year. Eagles are 14-3. I don't know. I feel like this game's gonna be a lot closer than people think. But the Rams have been spotty this year. The Eagles have also had some spots, like at the beginning of the year. But they just beat up on the Packers. The Rams just beat up on the Vikings. So this game will be pretty interesting. This is Sunday at 2 p.m. Who would you say is going to win this game if you had to pick?
I think this game will be decided on the trenches because in the playoff game that the Rams won, they had 9 touchdowns, and then in the Eagles game that they won, Saquon Barkley had a lot of rushing yards, and it'll be interesting because I think that'll be the deciding factor. Because they played earlier in the season, I think Saquon, he had 100-plus rushing yards, and that's how they beat the Rams.
Yeah, and also the fact that the Rams' defense played amazing this last game. They had so many takeaways. They played great this last game, and if they can play great against the Eagles, because the Eagles' passing game hasn't been tremendous.
Yeah.
The rushing game has been what's on point, and it's like with Penn State and Boise State. If you can stop the guy like Ashton Genty, if you can stop Saquon Barkley and force them to pass it, and you could defend the pass, then you can win this game. We could see a Rams upset. This would be my favorite for the week if I had to pick an upset for the Rams to beat the Eagles, but we'll probably see an Eagles versus Lions NFC Championship. Now, hopefully, it's not Eagles-Chiefs Super Bowl, because that would be terrible. And they'll probably get the lowest views ever, because we just saw that. No one wants to see that. We waited all season to see a good Super Bowl. Even Rams-Chiefs would be kind of boring, because we just saw the Rams, too. But that'll be an interesting game. I don't think that anyone's really questionable in this. Kyren Williams, the only person questionable, noticeably, is A.J. Brown. Like a Witherspoon, Bobby Brown, Tyler Higbee, they're all questionable. They'll all play. A.J. Brown is obviously going to play. I don't see anyone that's questionable not playing. And let's move to the most interesting game of the week. The Ravens and the Bills. Both these teams top seeds in the NFL, and arguably if they didn't play each other, I think one of them could, if it was, say, the Bills playing the Chiefs in this round or the Ravens playing the Chiefs in this round instead of the Texans, I think one of them could take down the Chiefs in the divisional round, and then we could see like a Ravens-Bills championship or AFC championship. But this one will be interesting because the Ravens are 12-5, the Bills are 13-4. They're playing at Highmark, which is a very difficult place to play. The Ravens have had some spots. They don't have the greatest passing game. They have Derrick Henry, and I think the Bills are going to struggle. This game is about as split as you can get, 50-50 basically, 50.3 Bills to 47.9 Ravens. It's about as split as you can get. James Cook eats up the Lions, and so does Derrick Henry.
He left no crumbs either.
Leave no crumbs. I think this game will be a lot closer than people think. And if the Ravens are going to win this game, it's going to be with the rush because the Bills' rush defense isn't the greatest. They made some stops earlier in the year, but they can get rushed all over, especially with Lamar and Derrick Henry. If the Ravens are going to be in the AFC Championship, this is going to be their year, but they're going to have to get through the Bills first. And if you had to pick someone to win this game, maybe some big thing to happen, what would it be?
This will be an interesting game because both of these teams are worthy of being a Super Bowl champion. And just saying that that's decided in the divisional round. But this game could go either way. As you see on ESPN, it's 50-50. But I think the Bills will edge out the Ravens. But I can see either team winning.
Yeah, it really depends. Like you said for the last game, this game's going to be one in the trenches. If Derrick Henry can run all over the Bills, this game's going to be ugly, and the Ravens are going to win this one pretty good because they're just going to keep pounding the ground. They're going to take Lamar to the outside, roll him out and play action. If he doesn't find a pass, he's going to run for 30 yards. If they can't stop the run. Same thing with the Ravens. If their defense can't stop the run or can't stop Josh Allen's passing game, they're going to lose. They got to be balanced on all sides of the ball. So this will be the game of the week. This will be very interesting. Let's go over some quick NFL news before we wrap up this episode. Bobby Wagner is questionable in the Commanders game. He's expected to play. Kind of like we were talking about earlier, Caleb Williams wants an offensive-minded head coach. Which would be Ben Johnson or Mike McCarthy. Basically just no Aaron Glenn. It would be interesting to see what the Bears end up with. Sean Payton says Bo Nix, he said, we found a player that can lead us. Obviously, he's going to be the guy there for the next couple of years. Chargers head coach Jim Harbaugh says he will have a heart procedure and hip replacement. Do it at the end of the year. Do it while you can rest up in the offseason. temperatures in Buffalo this week are going to be frigid, so that'll hopefully not be too bad. Browns sued by the city over a possible move from Cleveland to proposed Dome Stadium in the suburbs. I don't know. Cleveland's just a crap show, as it is. Quinn Ewers announced his intention to enter the NFL draft. Speaking of college, we'll get into that before we end this. I don't know. He feels like he's kind of like a system quarterback, Quinn Ewers. He'll be a later on pick, second day pick probably. Mm-hmm. But potentially to a team that needs a quarterback, like the Jets or something. And now, big event that's happening on Monday, probably before we get the next episode out, is the Natty, like national championship. We got Notre Dame and we got Ohio State. This is very interesting because we had Michigan and Washington last year. Now they're Big Ten opponents. And now, if we had to make predictions, and these teams have a lot of time to rest, like 2 weeks. If you had to make a prediction on who's going to win this, who would you say?
I would say Ohio State because they're the more talented team, but Notre Dame has been on a hot streak. They lost to NIU early in the season, and then they responded by just going on an absolute crazy win streak. They haven't looked weak ever since that game, and so even despite that, I think Ohio State's going to get the W.
Yeah, I could see that too. Ohio State has also been in a roll too. Both these teams are red hot. Absolutely curb stomping the number 1 seed no matter how they play. Mm-hmm. They have a week of rest. That's impressive, especially handing it to them. Notre Dame, like you said, they haven't lost a game since NIU, and that's the crazy thing about college. You can have these group of 5 schools beat these big schools that are in the Natty.
Yeah.
But both these quarterbacks will Howard get drafted, or does he have another year?
This is his last year.
He's like an older guy though.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But Riley Leonard probably would be a later steal in the draft, or maybe an undrafted free agent. But yeah, this will be interesting. The Natty. We'll get into more draft coverage and stuff as the weeks progress. Draft will be in April. A lot of teams be picking quarterbacks, looking for quarterbacks. Obviously, the top pick is probably going to be Cam Ward, Travis Hunter. Those guys are going to be up there on the top. Ashton Genty could be a steal. But I think this has been a good episode. We covered basically all the news we could. There'll be some interesting games of football this weekend. A lot of teams will go home. A lot of good teams, especially like one team, the Ravens or Bills, which is crazy to see because both these teams are Super Bowl teams, and one of them is going to have to go home. That's the crazy thing about the NFL, but it's part of the game, and it's going to be a great week of football. Hopefully everyone won their football or fantasy championships a couple weeks ago. I didn't win a single one of my 5 leagues, but yeah, we'll see where coaches land. We'll have a video or a podcast up next week about some coaches. If you want to stay up to date with coaches landing spots, follow our Instagram, Anytime Sports Podcast. Thank you, Riley, for coming on today, filling in for Colin. Who couldn't record today, but enjoy some football this weekend. Peace.